I was sexually abused as a young child. And for most of my life, that was my identity. I was the little girl who carried around this big, dark secret. But after 30 years of studying reincarnation and spiritual reality, I learned quite a lot about how to deal with it and what it all meant. Today, I'm going to talk very honestly about what it is I have learned, including the hard parts. So if you are watching this right now, chances are you probably have a history of this yourself, or you know somebody who does. This is a global pattern, and it's important to understand this, to really understand what is going on so that we can learn and grow spiritually and evolve beyond this experience. Now, usually when we talk about sexual abuse, we focus a lot on the victims, and we are going to talk about that, right? Because we're all here to heal, we're all here to grow. But I think it is also important to talk about the abusers, to talk about why abuse happens, what is going on in their minds. This is something I have struggled to understand and have dug deep into it. And I will tell you, what I have found on a spiritual level about why this is occurring has transformed me profoundly in a really beautiful, positive way. And I want to share this with you to hope that it can help us all change and transform. Okay, so obviously, this is a really hard, heavy topic. This video is gonna be a long one. I don't wanna do multiple videos. I don't wanna re-traumatize myself over and over again. I really wanna dig into this in one big video. So I will break it into pieces so that you can digest it as you wish. Obviously, trigger warning. We're gonna be talking about sexual abuse. If that's gonna trigger you, heads up, that's part of this video. Okay, so this isn't going to be about my story, but I feel like it's important to tell a little bit about my story so that you understand my context, my lens, where I'm coming from on this. So I was abused when I was about 5 or 6 years old by somebody that I knew and trusted. It wasn't a one-time thing. It went on for a little while. It did stop. But even after it stopped, I still carried it around with me for years and years and years. Like, it was who I was. I was this broken, damaged person. It became my identity as a child, like walking around through the playground, knowing that I had this big, dark secret. I was hurt. I was misunderstood. I didn't know how to communicate. I didn't know how to express myself. I know when I did express myself, it wasn't always received well. And you look at my artwork and my poetry, there is a lot about broken glass or being broken, because that's what I thought I was. I thought I was this shattered person. That began to shift in my teen years when I began learning about reincarnation, right? When I began to find a spiritual way to understand the world. And so when I began to look at, well, who I am is bigger than just this life. Who I am goes over lives and lives and lives. So maybe this thing that happened to me isn't who I am, right? If I existed life and life and life before this is something that happened in this life. And I really wanted to understand why. Why did this happen to me in this life? What was it that I need to learn from it if there's something I'm supposed to be learning from it? How can I heal it? How can I grow beyond it? How can I be bigger? This really became a lot of the fuel as I dug into reincarnation to understand how I could heal what was broken within me, to only find out there was nothing broken within me. So through this and through therapy, right? Therapy is always good. Did some group therapy as well with other survivors, which was very impactful, which was really beautiful. It shifted me. And it's now that this is not my identity at all. This is something that happened to me as a child. This is something I still have impacts, I still have damage, I still have patterns that I've learned that I carry with me, and I'm still learning and unpacking and trying to release and let go of, but it's no longer who I am. It's a homework assignment for me to work through in order to be a brighter person. And before you think this is just my story, we all know it isn't, right? Globally, 1 in 3 women have experienced some form of sexual violence, probably underreported. In the US, the CDC has reported that over 50% of women and 1 in 3 men have experienced some form of sexual violation. And most of the time, this is by people that we know, people that we love or respect or who are there to take care of us, right? This is not stranger danger. So we need to stop with that storyline. Okay, I'm gonna start out with the big question. The one everybody asks, why does God allow this to happen? If there is a God, right? That's the big debunker of, is there a God? If there's a God, why would God allow these horrible things, particularly to children? Why would God allow them to happen? Okay, well, first off, my first answer is, hey, reminder, we are God. We are God embodied. We don't remember it. Some of us, most of us don't remember it, but we are God embodied. So my question is, why are we allowing this to happen? Why are we, as divine and powerful as we are, why are we allowing this to happen? Okay, second, free will, right? That's the game here. God gave us free will, and that can't be pick and choose on free will. God can't come and say, well, you can have free will here and not here. God says, okay, here's the game you're playing. Play this game. What are you going to make of it? I'm going to watch. I'm going to send as much love as I can. I'm going to send as much help and support as I can as you make these really horrible choices. But what will you make of this thing called life? What will you do with it? And third, right, darkness, hardness, suffering that can often be used as a catalyst for our spiritual growth. Certainly what I've chosen to do with it. I have chosen consciously and intentionally to take my suffering and use it for something to help me grow. Now, is suffering required for spiritual growth? No. And I'm really, really hoping we are moving into a new version of reality where we don't have to suffer in order to learn. But that said, this darkness and suffering and horribleness can cause us to grow. It can cause people to crack open. I don't think that's any justification to keep it around. I don't think it's any justification for darkness. I'm just saying, even the worst things, we can find a way to use for beautiful and powerful purposes. Don't think it should exist, but if it does, let's transform it. Okay, the next big question, and this is one that I have really struggled with, is this pre-planned? As you know, maybe you know if this is the first video you watch to find, you don't know. But one of the things I talk about over and over again is that we plan our lives before we are born. I know this because of my 30 years of reincarnation research, from studying near-death experiences, from studying past life regressions, from studying children that talk about what happened before they came into form. We plan out our lives before we live them. Not every single detail, but the big ones. Well, if you've gone through sexual abuse, you're going to feel like that's a pretty big one. So the question is, did you plan that? Did I plan that? I don't know. When I look at all of the research, it kind of comes into two camps. One, yes, people did plan it. Two, no, but maybe we planned the circumstances that we were going to be in, power dynamics, and that this might happen. Sometimes it could be that we know that this might happen. I will say that, like Robert Schwartz and some of the past life regressions he's done, and also there's another near-death experience of a woman who went through horrible life stories, who went through and saw, oh yeah, she did actually a plan to experience rape and all of these other horrible things. So I think it's possible that some people have planned out these things because they knew it would provide them a profound opportunity for growth. But I do not think all abuse is pre-planned. That's my opinion and what I know on my heart and my soul level. There is a lot of darkness in this world, and sometimes we find ourselves in the middle of it. And if we have energies that we are still working through around not being in our own power, where we're in a lot more of our victim, there are a lot of dark energies that can take advantage of that. And then I think it's important to talk about karma too, right? That's one thing that I think gets really misunderstood, karma. The idea that karma is a punishment. It is not a punishment. Everything that I've learned, it's a balancing. It's a balancing, not a punishment. So if you were abused and you think that you were punished for something that you did in your past life, please let yourself off the hook. Please let yourself off the hook. I will say that it is possible, right? I think it's certainly in my case, because I've been like this leader in a lot of my past lives. I've done bad things. I have misused my power in previous lives. And I think that in this life, I wanted to experience the misuse of power. Does that mean I plan to be abused? Don't know. But I do believe that I wanted to experience the darker side of power, and perhaps I knew there was a possibility that this would go along with it. Again, I don't know, it's very hard to accept that I would have chosen this ahead of time. I'm sure you are feeling the same way. Some people, it makes them feel empowered. So if it makes you feel empowered, go for it. If it doesn't, leave it alone. In order to really look at the truth of sexual abuse from a spiritual perspective, a reincarnation perspective, I think we also really need to look at the truth about sexual abuse, because there is a huge casting of this in the world. I really want to break down all of these, because I think this mainstream narrative of what it looks like and who it happens to is very destructive. And in order to really heal this, because we're doing this right now, we're healing this on some level as we're engaging in this knowledge exchange, we need to really look at it. The cultural story is that this is what I was raised with. I don't know. No, this is what I was told. Wasn't helpful for me, but it's going to be done by a stranger, and you're going to fight back, and they're going to physically force you to do it. That's what it looks like. And so if it doesn't look like this, and there isn't proof that it was this, right? There's no marks of fighting back, it can be discounted. This is obviously BS. Not to say that it doesn't look like that sometimes. It certainly does. It certainly does. But it's a lot more nuanced and a lot more of a spectrum than that simple viewpoint that the cultural narrative proposes. And I think when we hold that up, it allows a lot of perpetrators to convince themselves that they're not doing anything wrong because they didn't force anybody, or they didn't fight back, or they're showing their love. Whatever their story is. And like I said, we'll get into what their story is when we talk about what's going on with the abuser side of things. The truth here is, and this is something that I just feel so strongly that we need to name over and over again, is compliance. We can go along with it. We can go along with it because maybe we're a child and we don't know what consent is. We don't know what right and wrong is. We don't know that feeling that we don't really like, but this person in power says we should be doing this, right? And so we go on because there's a lot of things that adults say that we should do that we don't want to do. So we go along with it, right? So it can look like they're engaging in it willfully when they just don't know any better, because they are children. They don't know how to consent. And another thing I really want to name, because this is not talked about commonly at least, and I think this is something that can really screw up people that had child abuse, is that your body can physiologically respond to it, right? Again, we have this narrative that it is force. Well, what happens if you're a child and you weren't forced. And what happens if you're a child and your body responds to it in a positive way? And maybe it didn't, but it's very confusing because you're like, my body is responding physiologically, but I don't like this. And does this mean there's something wrong with me? Am I bad? Is my sexuality bad? Am I a horrible person? Do I deserve to be punished? Right? There's all of this garbage that happens inside of children that go through this, and it impacts their brain development as well. It's a gift that just keeps on giving throughout the lifetime of a child who's experienced sexual activity before they were of an age to consent. And I've been talking about children, but it is not just children that we're talking about here, right? It's also other folks that are vulnerable, whatever that might be, especially women, right? In patriarchal societies, women don't have a lot of power. And women, and I'm going to talk about men too, because this doesn't just happen to women by any means, but as women, like, we live our entire lives knowing that our life is in danger. Just walking down the street, we got to do the weird key thing to make little claws. We know that around any corner there can be a man, we don't know who, and we don't know what he's going to look like, but that can cause us danger. So when we are then in a situation where this is happening, it's a very natural physiological response to freeze. That can happen, that you just freeze, or that you even go along with it because you don't know what else to do, and you've kind of been programmed, like it's in the soup that we're living in, that you're supposed to be making people happy. And so, well, this person wants this, I'll just go along with this. Now, again, there are a lot of gradients of what sexual assault looks like. But I'm saying this because we have this narrative that if you weren't forced, physically forced, then nothing bad happened to you. Their violation can look like lots of different shades. So then the resulting narrative ends up being that the victim who's gone through actual harm blames themselves and holds themselves accountable for something they didn't really want to participate in at all. And the abuser, and I think this is even more important to call out, and then the abuser lets themselves off the hook because they didn't say no, or they didn't fight back. I didn't make them do anything. They just continued to push beyond that person's boundaries and didn't respect or listen to what those boundaries were. I really want to point you to watch the morning show. The first season is something that just portrayed it perfectly. I was so impressed and blown away. It was the first time that I had seen the nuance and the complication and the confusion around what sexual assaults can look like. So if you haven't watched the morning show season 1 and you are up for it, I really recommend it because it could be very healing for you to see, oh, here's somebody who went through this experience, or to understand like, oh, here's what was in the mind of the perpetrator and what he was going through. And another thing that I want to talk about that, again, we don't talk about is this happens to a lot of men. And that is its own kind of wound when this happens to men. And I will tell you personally, in the romantic relationships I've been in with men, yeah, when I opened up about what happened to me, sure enough, they had their own secrets that were so hard for them to talk about. They could only give me a few words and couldn't talk any more than that about it. And in fact, the first person I ever knew that talked about their personal experience was a man. This happens to men. But the cultural story is that women are victims and men are perpetrators. And certainly, right, when we look at statistics, that certainly does play out, but it then discounts people's experience because men can be victims and women can be perpetrators. Doesn't happen as often as the dynamic we all know and love, but what ends up happening to men, I think, particularly, is that there's this male expectation that you're supposed to want sex all the time. So if this happens to you, well, didn't you want it because you're a man? And also, well, if you were a victim, like it's okay for women to be victims, but it's not okay for a man to be victim. So then it like really can fracture your masculinity. Again, I call this out because there are all sorts of different wounds that we're carrying around. And your wound is valid too. So we go through all this and you're like, Jillian, this isn't spiritual. This is regular stuff that you would listen to or learn about on any other sexual assault sort of educational materials. Why are you going through this? Because these are patterns that we are learning on a soul spiritual level. We are learning about respect. We are learning about validation. We are learning about power. And this is what it manifests as in the behavioral realm. And more importantly, because we need to look at the structures that are going on our societal levels, right? The Epstein stuff has shone some light onto all of that, but this is not just this one group of horrible people. This is something worldwide. Again, we are talking in the US, over 50% of women and almost 1 in 3 men have experienced some form of sexual violation. So, what is happening on a human race sort of a level? What's happening when we are looking at victim blaming and shaming? We are at a time of change, of spiritual change. When you hear a lot about a new earth, for example, we're coming into a new version of reality where we're shifting what power looks like. So as part of this, we're looking at our power structures and about how they enable horrible things to happen to people. And one of the horrible things that happens to people is misuse of sexual energy for power and control reasons. So it's coming up for us to look at, to see what is this ugliness so that we can name it and clear it and release it. We need to know this is how it plays out and to stop playing pretend and to stop pretending as if it only looks like one thing when it looks like a lot of different things. I think one of the things that I heard was really powerful was that often when somebody hears about like all of this violence that happens or Epstein or whatever, the reaction is, oh, I'm going to go and beat up the perpetrator, that it's about violence to the perpetrator. But really, you know, anybody who's been a victim of this, it's like, no, what about the healing for the victim? It's so interesting that we orient ourselves towards violence in reaction to this, as opposed to towards healing. I want us to get oriented towards healing, and in order to do that, we need to name our wounds. We need to look at the wounds that we carry and to know that yes, these are wounds. So I just want to note a little bit about healing too, because we really focus a lot about healing around therapy and around the event. I want to talk a little bit about healing on a spiritual level, because there are patterns that you're playing out. This could be healing that you're needing to do throughout previous lives. This might not be the only life that you've experienced this, or there are other stories around powerlessness or boundaries being eradicated or not respected. There are patterns that want to be healed and cleared. There's also a karmic connection with your perpetrator that you might want to go through a process of doing some cord cutting or other sorts of disconnecting from having to continue to engage or pour energy into this karmic relationship. You may also really want to focus on healing your relationship with your body. Our bodies get really damaged by this. This is something that happens to the body and can disconnect us from the body, make us hate the body, make us not trust the body. So there is healing, right, in our body relationship that has an opportunity to as well. Okay, so before I move on to talking about why this happens, why abusers do what they do, I'm going to do the ask for you to like this video, to share it, to subscribe if you are so inclined to learn more or to hear more about what I have to say. And I ask that not, for my own, like, oh, I want to feel listened to, sort of a reason, but because I feel like this video is very important. I think it's really important for people to hear what the message of this video is. And it's through doing all of those things, the liking, the subscribing, the commenting, that lets the algorithm know that this is a video people want to see. Okay, thank you. On that, let's move on to the really dark side, heavy side of this, which is the abusers. I am a huge believer that we all are a piece of the divine. We all are sparks of God, and we are here on form to learn lessons, to go through these challenges, etc. So how is it that someone who is a spark of the divine could do this? So, like everything in life, sexual abuse is on a spectrum. Sexual abusers are also on a spectrum. So on this spectrum, on one end, people who did this violation through ignorance. They didn't understand consent. I'm imagining this is particularly maybe a situation where there's drinking involved, young adults hanging out, etc. But even though they didn't understand the harm that they were causing, they did cause harm and they are responsible for it. Then we have folks that they knew it was wrong, but they rationalized it. They kind of know that they're not being respectful, that they're taking advantage of or abusing, but they don't even see it that way because they're going through their own cognitive dance in their head about what they're doing. And then we have people that actually seek it out. They want that power. They want to prey on the vulnerable. And then we have, at the most extreme evil level, the type that actually goes and actively creates an entire network of people that commit abuse. So that's one layer, that spectrum of basically awareness, how aware they are of what they're doing. Now we're going to look at what's happening on the personality level, and then we're going to look at what's happening on the soul level with these perpetrators. So one I think that is talked about quite a bit is to acknowledge that people who do these acts often have their own trauma history. They often have grown up with this themselves and this is normal to them. Maybe this is even, for some, this might be how they think love is expressed, is through this sexual violation. Of course, this provides context, right, to why they engage in this, but not justification, right? Not everybody who is abused becomes an abuser. Then we get into the next bucket, which is cognitive dissonance, cognitive justification, the magic of the mind. This is something I actually learned a lot about when I was a psychology major in college, is how powerful the mind is to warp reality in order to protect your own sense of identity. So a lot of people aren't going to want to go around thinking, I'm a bad person, I harmed somebody. So they're going to shift the story so that they still feel like they are good, like they are okay. I think this happens a lot when we're talking about people that aren't quite at the evil end. We're going to get into the evil end of the spectrum. So this is when we're going to get the things like people are telling themselves, well, she wanted it. Well, they didn't say no, they didn't push back, they didn't fight me. This isn't really hurting them. Everybody does this. This is what happens in families. This is what happens on dates. This is what happens in marriages. Whatever it is, they've created a story that gives them permission, that makes it okay for them to do this. And they reinforce this over and over again until it becomes their truth. But then it becomes this very fragile reality that they've created for themselves. And they have to protect this reality now at all costs. And anything that threatens this reality is a huge danger. If this was abuse that happened in a family, for example, and somebody is going to the father and saying, you did this to me, no, I didn't do this to you. They have to maintain that reality because their entire identity is propped up by this structure, this framework of their identity, of who they are. And if they begin to accept that they caused harm to another person, their entire persona is at risk and is at danger. So this is very high stakes for them to believe these truths, to believe what they think are truth, but to believe these falsehoods that they've created. I think the most critical piece too is this objectification or disassociation. So we're going to talk about this as well. This ties into the spiritual side of things, but when you start to not see the other person as a human being and they become an object, they're a source for this person to get whatever it is that they want. And then is the level of entitlement. There's this sense of, I deserve this. Maybe the spoils of war, if you will. Sometimes they may even do some of that cognitive manipulation in their heads to think like, oh, the person's going to benefit from this. The person is going to benefit from being in my sphere, or for me to, right, if I'm sex trafficking them, well, they're going to get all of this travel. They're going to meet all of these other famous people. They're going to benefit from this in some way. So that can be a story that they tell in their head. It's not even about the sex for them. It's about being able to be above these taboos, being able to be so powerful that they can break these societal expectations and norms and get away with it. And so then again, it shores up that feeling of really being powerful and special. So we go through all of that, all of how these behaviors show up in this life, because this is how it manifests. When we understand the spiritual layer underneath it, that is how it's showing up in the lived experience. So let's look at what's showing up on the soul experience. Part of what's going on is this is usually predominantly done by younger souls. When we are younger souls, and you haven't learned how to master the human body yet, the human body is full of violent tendencies and sexual urges that when you don't have seniority over your impulses, you might be more inclined to go along with what those impulses are. It gets into the lack of empathy. When you're a younger soul and you haven't gone through a lot of lives yet, you haven't had a lot of experiences, it's a lot easier for you to only think about yourself and to not realize that every person around you has a depth of experience. You don't have a lot of empathy built up because you haven't gone through all of those different life experiences. Okay, so let's say early in your life, you didn't have control over your body, you didn't have empathy, so that you perpetuated this harm. Well, in another life, now you've got karma. So now in another life, you're experiencing harm, you're experiencing vulnerability, you're experiencing the loss of power, and it's not good. It's not good, you don't like it. So then when you incarnate again to get any chance of power, you're going to hold on to that power as much as you can because you don't want to be vulnerable again. You don't want to be victimized again. And maybe you only see that there's only two ends of the spectrum, that there's either victims or perpetrators. That could be a lived reality. And so you think, I'm going to be a perpetrator then. So, okay. So then you come into that stage in your soul evolution where you are wanting to feel safe. So in order to feel safe, you commit crimes against other people because that makes you feel powerful. And it makes you feel so powerful that you keep doing it maybe in previous lives because you got fed off of it somehow. It made you feel important because you felt entitled to other people's bodies. Well, this is now causing some pretty serious harm to your soul. This is not in alignment with who you naturally are. And you're going to be getting opportunities to get course corrected. You're going to have some hard lives. You're going to have messages that come through. You're going to have things that are pointing you in a particular direction to wake up, but maybe you don't want to wake up. Maybe you're afraid to wake up. You're afraid to look at that part of you and you begin to pull away from your light. This is where things get interesting. Because once you begin to pull away from your light, you're contracting your soul. This was something that really caused me some understanding is this idea of your soul can be expansive and shining light, or it can be contracting and pulling away from light. So you begin to pull away from your light. And so your energy gets denser, it gets tighter. And as it gets tighter, less light can get into it. That means the messages, the helpers, God, etc., it's a lot denser to penetrate. So the very thing that's going to help you open up is not reaching you. Okay, so that's the case. So now you're hardening. Your soul is hardening. Like a calcification that's happening. It's a soul densification. And as that happens, you're getting less and less connected to all that is, and more just into your own little hardened shell. This is what makes the dissociation, the objectification, so much more easy. Because as you are not connecting up to the grid of existence, and you are not connected with this idea that we're all one, we're all part of this experience at whatever layer of awareness that comes to you, you're now seeing those other people around you as separate from you. And when they're separate from you and you're not going to feel their pain, you are not connected to whatever their experience is, it becomes a lot easier to make them an object and then to do harmful things to them. But this keeps going, right? Life after life. The universe is going to keep on providing you opportunities to crack you open. They're going to get harder experiences. Life is going to get a lot more challenging. Your soul is going to get denser. It's going to have a lot more karma. It's going to get weighed down by this karma. Your lives begin to look uglier and uglier because you are receiving the ugliness that you're putting out into the world. And then you just become, it's like a cycle. It becomes harder and harder to break you out of it the further down this path you go into this darkness. And I say darkness intentionally because it's far from the light. This is when we get into the concept of evil. I'll often say evil is like absence of light or distance from light. This is how that happens, this pulling away and pulling away and pulling away from the light because you don't want to have to go through the accountability process, the accepting that you did something wrong. It eventually gets to the point where that person, that being, can't even process the concept that other people have lived experiences, that other people experience pain or suffering, because you're so stuck and hardened in this shell, in this darkness. And then because they're not getting fed by the light, they need to be fed by something. And so it twists, it gets corrupted. Instead of being fed by the love that we all emanate, they begin looking for the pain from other people, the suffering, the dark side. That now feeds them and fuels them. This is how we get these really atrocious situations that people can perpetuate, because now their soul is hungry for darkness because they're totally closed off to receiving any other form of nourishment. I mean, one of the notes that I made here was that they are, and I feel like it's appropriate to share, it's this idea that they're harvesting other people's pain. I mean, isn't that just horrifying to say? So I went through the scale, right? I went through the scale of like, oh, I didn't know what I was doing, to like, ooh, I knew what I was doing and I loved it. I fed off of it. Because I want to call this out, it's a progression. And the only way you're going to get out of it here when you're at this point is through some really catastrophic, soul breaking open, horrible, dramatic events. And even that might not happen. And so in that case, if it gets all the way to that point, the research has shown that sometimes it means souls need to be recycled if they're completely unsalvageable. And I'm going to tell you, God and the spirit guides, the universe, whatever words you want to use, are going to do everything they can to try to rescue and redeem that soul before it gets to the point where it has to get recycled. And recycled, that's a very human word, but my understanding is there is some sparks that exist, but it basically needs to be broken down for parts and refashioned when it's realized that there's just no hope for this being. So as we look along this scale, what I'm interested in, how can we help people course correct here before it gets here? Because once it gets here, that's a lot of destruction that's being wrought on the world, and it's really not good for anybody. So if you are somebody who has perpetuated, if a lot of the first part of the video I was talking about victims, perhaps you're somebody who's actually done something. Again, maybe out of ignorance, maybe because you've told yourself whatever you've told yourself, maybe because you experienced harm yourself, whatever it is. As I share this spectrum, what do you want to do with that knowledge? Do you want to continue down this path until you become this hardened, harvesting predator that has to get recycled? Or do you want to take accountability for your karma, for what you did, and be honest that this is something that you perpetrated, that there's harm that you caused, and that you now are in debt to another person or persons, and you need to make it right? And if you do, there is a path back up the scale. In fact, if you do, you have the potential to help others on this spectrum because you know what it's like to be on this spectrum. Now, for me, I said before, this was this eye-opening experience for me, this idea of soul contraction, because yes, it happens when we commit violent acts on other people and we contract. And those could be sexual, they could be just physical violent acts, whatever, things that are not of light and love. But it also, I think, happens, this soul contraction, when we're doing violence to ourselves, when we're being unkind to ourselves, when we're judging ourselves, we contract, we're pulling away from the light. And that contraction can take us on that spiral as well. And maybe it's not a spiral that leads us to harvest other people's pain. Maybe it's a spiral that leads us to harvest our own pain. Ugh. Yuck. That felt really true and really horrible. So for me, this has transformed me because I now tune into my body and I feel, is this contracting energy or is this expanding energy? And I want to expand. I want to expand like a mother. I want to expand and shine light and let go of these lower energies. And I will tell you, it's great. It's really feeling pretty amazing to feel expansive and open and to not pull into that contracting energy. Because as we shine our light brighter, maybe we're able to reach people that are in need of healing and people that are in need of finding their way back to their own light. Because we can. Right? People that are in this spectrum can be redeemed. They can be redeemed. The big moment of intervention to try to reach these souls happens after they die. Because while they're in human form, they can live in their delusions. But after they die, they go through a process that is focused on trying to help them develop, connect to their empathy. And also there's a whole world that they might end up experiencing that looks like hell to get them to face up to whatever their personal reality is. Now, they choose to go through that hell, but as I said, there is a process on the other side to help them learn and grow. I did a video, as you can imagine, all about that. It's here. It's really, I think, useful to understand what happens to bad people after they die. What are our spirit guides doing to try to help reach them? I hope this was helpful. We're in this together, all of us. We are not alone. All right, until next time.